James Young purchased 320 acres for $1.25 per acre, the established federal land price in 1837. Using the land as security, Young received a $1,000 loan from the Montgomery branch of the Bank of Alabama. James Young acquired the acreage for the town, but it was his son Griffin who laid off a portion of that land into business lots, establishing what is now known as the town square. The Young family was instrumental in the economic development of the area. There have been members of the Young family in what is now known as Alexander City since the 1830s and 40s. Jerry Allen, a local banker and descendant of the settling family of Youngs, recalled growing up in the historic Fred Walker Young house. The home is listed on the Alabama Register of Landmarks and Heritage.
My mother was Von Seal Young, and she was from the Young family that helped settle this area back in the early 1830s. And it seems like there were 4 or 5 brothers that came into this area, Harrison Young, Bird Young, James Young, Griffin Young, and maybe I've left one out, but there were about 5 brothers that came here, and they did a variety of things. Some of them ran a general store, some of them were postmasters, some of them were farmers, but I am a descendant of that family of Youngs, as are a lot of other people in Ellick City and in this area. And my mother was always very conscious of that fact, and she was constantly talking about the early life for her in this county. She was born on what we say is Lake Martin now. She called it the river. She was born on the Tallapoosa River in 1910. And when she was 4 years old, she moved to a home on Cherokee Road, which is still standing and it still belongs to the family. And that home was originally 3 rooms, and they were log cabin. It was a log cabin. And of course, there's been rooms added to it, but we discovered the fact it was a log cabin back in the 50s. We didn't know it at that time. When some men were doing some work and they were cutting through one of the walls to make another room, and they burned up an electric saw trying to cut through some of the logs. Bird was also known as Simon Suggs, and he was one of the early brothers that came in here. There were a lot of stories about him. Johnson Jones Hooper, as you know, I guess made him infamous. We won't say famous, we'll say infamous. And made him so famous in those days and times that my family, the early members of my family, went about the country buying the book and destroying it because there were so many stories in there that they didn't want told about Simon. Simon lived here in Alexander City, Alabama, and in Dadeville. There are many members of the family that could tell you stories about him, and I'll have to say the story that I'll tell came from Myrtle Young, who was a cousin of mine and a direct descendant of Simon Suggs or Bird Young. There's a story that goes about he wanted to have a camp meeting. They didn't call them revivals in those days, they called them camp meetings. So he was having this camp meeting, and he went about raising money to pay the expenses of the camp meeting. And he was a great storyteller and a great talker, which seems to be a characteristic of the family. And he collected a great deal of money. And the night before the camp meeting was to begin and the preacher came to town, Simon disappeared with all the money. And of course, there was no camp meeting, and that was just one of the many examples of Simon Suggs.